But today we're going to look at the trials. Last week we looked at Judas's betrayal, and today we're going to look at this so-called trials. And I'll call them a mockery trial. That's what they were, and we won't be able to hit all these details that are in here. And there's all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all cover this. But we happen to be working in John, and we're going to actually look at two other spots in Luke and Matthew just to get some reference. But it's important for us to learn this because this is going to seem more like a classroom college lecture than it is a Bible study for a few minutes, just because of the historical part of it. But we do want to look at the same time what Jesus is doing through this, because boy, is he genius in how he goes through this whole trial. And there's nothing that we can say when we get through it except complete. I mean, if we read this and study it, we'll completely see how Jesus was absolutely innocent. There's no denying that, given all this evidence that's here. And we're going to have person after person as we go through these Gospels that show that. Pilate does, Herod does, the Roman soldier that's there at the cross does. Even Judas himself, after he's messed up, tells, after they give him his 30 pieces of silver, he throws it on the ground and says, "I've betrayed innocent blood." So as hard as these Pharisees, Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, we're going to talk about, try to make Jesus guilty, they could not do it. And that's what I want us to see today, is that there was no sin and no guilt on Jesus, but he voluntarily condemned himself, okay? And he's going to use their law to expose them, and also he's going to use their law to condemn himself, because we know from study already, the original plan was Jesus comes to earth to die for our sins. And the only way that happens is if something causes him to be in a place of guilt, okay? And so that's what we'll look at as we go through today. So Jesus had to condemn himself, and we're going to look at this trial because last week Judas betrays Jesus in our lesson, and the mob comes to get Jesus and they take him away. Now our lesson skips today, it actually skips the first two people that Jesus is going to see, but we're not going to skip it. We're going to go through because I want us to see that night and how that went. Jesus actually went to 4 different people through the night. Their names were Annas, Caiaphas, Pilate, and Herod. Those were the 4 people. Now you say, well, how were they all there at one time and he's able to see them all in one night? Because we have to remember that it's the week of the Passover festival, and all those people are there. And if there's one thing that the Romans could not stand, was a whole pile of Jews gathered together at one time, because that meant they could, if they wanted to, rise up against the Roman government. And Rome controlled the world at the time. They absolutely controlled the Jews and their religion. They said, you can have your little religion, have your festivals, slaughter your lambs, go ahead, but you rise up against us and you're all going to be dead meat. And so they were all there to make sure nothing got started, nothing got stirred up. So it's amazing how this all worked out. And everything through history just comes to this one little boiling point. And that's what happened. So they carry Jesus away to Annas. Now, when we read through this, and we'll stop in a second and just read to catch up. But for time's sake, just sort of summarize some. Annas and Caiaphas are both called high priests in this. And it would be like when a United States president is elected. Whether he's serving an active term or after he's through serving his term, he's still called Mr. President till the rest of his life. And that until his death. And so that's what's happened here. So let's read. Let's start at 18. And let's start at verse 12. So we're going to start chapter 18 and verse 12. And so it says, Then the company of soldiers, the commander and the Jewish officials, arrested Jesus, tied him up. First they led him to Annas, since he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it would be better for one man to die than for the people. And then we're going to read about Simon Peter's denial there. I'm not going to take time to read the actual scripture, but you remember Simon Peter denying that he even knew Jesus 3 times, exactly as Jesus said that he would. Okay, go skip to verse 19. The high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus answered. I have always taught in the synagogue and in the temple, where all the Jews congregate, and I haven't spoken anything in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who heard what I told them. Look, they know what I said. When he had said these things, one of the officials standing by slapped Jesus and saying, is this the way you answer the high priest? Now stop right there. So what's happened so far? They've carried him to Annas. Remember, Annas was the high priest, and he was before Caiaphas. So what happened was Annas had become the most powerful Jew in the region. He controlled everything about the temple. Do you remember how we talked earlier about the temple tax and the temple livestock and the exchange rates and how he was cheating every way he could, and it was all lining his own pockets? He controlled it all. And he had so much power, apparently, that the Roman government had said, fine, you can be the high priest for life, but you're not going to be serving as the active high priest every year. You can have control over what goes on over there, but we're going to have our thumb on top of you at all times. So what would happen is after he served his time, you didn't get to be the active high priest forever. That would be alternating. But he had so much sway that he made sure all of his sons and sons-in-law would be the next high priest. So he owned this thing. Annas did. And so Caiaphas, it says there is his son-in-law, would be this one that was active at the time. So they carry him to Annas, and Annas questions him, and then he goes to Caiaphas. Now, Annas would have wanted to hit crack at him because not too long ago, Jesus had flipped the tables over and had destroyed all his sweet deal he had going, collecting money from everybody. You had to have the temple's livestock to be sacrificed. You had to use temple tax to get in. You had to use temple currency, so you had to pay the exchange rates. And so he would want his shot at Jesus. And when he gets his shot, Jesus talks to him openly, and he basically says, what you're doing is wrong. If you want to hear something from me, go ask the people I've been talking to. As he says, where's all these Jews that congregate? I've spoken nothing in secret. Go ask them. Now, there's some things happening that in the background that's not even mentioned in Scripture. But Jewish law held that you could not have a trial in the middle of the night. It had to be in the daytime in public. And they were doing this in the middle of the night. Why? Because they knew if they did it in public, it would be a fair trial, and he probably would get away with innocence. But being it's in the middle of the night, they can take care of this behind the scenes, the dirty work, and get it all done before daylight, and nobody would know. They would just wake up and go, we found him guilty, and it's over and done with. There was other things that happen. It's not done in public, as I said. You got to have witnesses. Where are they going to find witnesses at 4 o'clock in the morning? Okay. The other thing is you were not allowed to force the person that was accused of something to speak, like pleading the fifth for us. Here they've asked him to do this. So they were breaking law after law after law that they claimed to uphold. These were the guys that claimed to be the most righteous. So Annas is where he is first. He speaks back and says, you want to know something, go ask those people. And the servant there next to him, one of the officials, and slaps Jesus across the face. It says, is that the way you speak to him? Well, he answers back, he says, have I spoken wrongly? Give evidence about the wrong I did. But if I did right, why'd you hit me? So verse 24, then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Because Annas says, all right, this plan's under control. Caiaphas, if you remember, was the one who went to him a few chapters back and said, look, if we just get rid of him, it'll save all of us. Or the whole world's going to be lost if we let him stay alive. He didn't know what kind of truth he was saying, because what he says, if this one man dies, all of us get to live. Now, he wasn't speaking from a spiritual standpoint at all. He was speaking from a greedy, powerful standpoint. So anyway, there it reads about Peter denying Jesus the 2 other times. And then 28 is where our lesson is going to pick up. Before we read that, go over to, let's read that. Let's start with verse 28. So then they led Jesus to Caiaphas, to the governor's headquarters. Remember, all this is right here in Jerusalem together. And he's going to get carried from place to place like a ping pong ball through the night. They led him to Caiaphas. It was early morning. They did not enter the headquarters themselves. Otherwise, they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover. What in the world? So these guys would not go into the headquarters themselves where they would be defiled and unable to eat the Passover. So they're going to Pilate's compound after this. So he goes from Annas and then goes to Caiaphas. Now, while he's with Caiaphas, let's go to Luke 22. Luke chapter 22. You don't have to turn. I'm just going to read it. We're going to Luke chapter 22 and 66 is the verse we're going to start at. 66. This is Jesus facing the Sanhedrin. When daylight came, the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the scribes, convened and brought him before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was 71 men. They were they were the priests, they were the elders, and they were the scribes, 23 of each. And then the high priest and the active high priest for that year. So now we got Annas and Caiaphas. So we got all the top people in the Jewish religion. Okay. They said, if you are the Messiah, tell us. But he said to them, if I do tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. And they all asked, are you then the Son of God? And he said to them, you say that I am. Why do we need any more testimony? They said, since we've heard it ourselves from his mouth. Now I'm going to go to Matthew. We're reading a couple of accounts just to get all this picture in our head. So remember, he's in front of the Sanhedrin. Annas and Caiaphas are there. And we're going to Matthew 26, and I'm starting with verse 57. Matthew 26, 57. Here he's facing the Sanhedrin. This is Matthew's account. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were convened. Peter was following them at a distance right to the high priest's courtyard. He went in and was sitting with the servants to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false testimony against Jesus, so they could put him to death. But they could not find any, even though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 who came forward stated, This man said, I can destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. The high priest stood up and said to him, don't you have an answer to what these men are testifying against you? But Jesus kept silent. So he's keeping their law. He's keeping their law. You did not talk back to the high priest. You did not talk back to the Sanhedrin. You kept quiet. He's keeping their law. But Jesus kept silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Another one they're breaking. You were not allowed to make the accuser speak. Verse 64, you have said it. Now he speaks. Jesus told him, but I'll tell you, but this is what they wanted to hear. In the future you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. And that's when they said, we got him, because now he's committed blasphemy. And in verse 65, then the high priest tore his robes and said, he has blasphemed. Why do we still need witnesses? See, now you've heard the blasphemy. What's your decision? They answered, he deserves death. Now look at what the religious leaders, the scribes, the elders, and the priest, and the high priest, and the active high priest. They spit in his face and beat him. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah. They get down off their chairs, go down, and start hitting him. And Mark says they blindfolded him in his gospel, and they come by and question him, who hit you that time? You're a prophecy. You can do prophecy. Who hit you? Who's that that's hitting you? It's just a disgusting scene to try to imagine that these are the men that's supposed to be leading the Jewish nation in righteousness and following God, and they're spitting and beating on a man who they know is innocent, but is challenging their authority and power because he is busting open the corrupt system that they have put in place. Okay, so go back to our lesson over in John. We're back in 18, and we're over in verse 29 now. So Pilate came out. So now what they've done is they say, good, we got him, and he's got to be killed. One big problem. The Sanhedrin was meant to be a body that saved lives. They were supposed to be the defense attorney. They've turned to prosecution. There were no prosecution. The prosecution would be the two witnesses. By the way, they would only have male witnesses because a female witness was considered to be soft-hearted enough and caring and loving enough that if they had enough pity and compassion on the person, they'd let them go. So they would only take male witnesses. Tell you something about what they thought of women at the time. I mean, they really felt that women had more compassion on people. Anyway, shows what they thought of the men at the time too. But anyway, here they are, and they have said, we want this man killed. We want him gone. We've got a problem. We can't be the ones to kill him. Why? Because the Sanhedrin is not about killing people. The Sanhedrin is about saving people. We got to find somebody else to do the dirty work for us. Not only that, the Passover's this week. If we do something this bad, we can't be part of the Passover meal tomorrow. We can't enjoy the family gatherings and everything that goes with it. So where are we seeing him? Pilate. The Romans, they can do it for us. So this was the dirty, evil, twisted plot they've concocted. We'll just get him guilty. Now we're sending to Pilate and let them take care of him. So verse 29, Pilate comes out to him and says, what charge do you bring against this man? And they answered him, if this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you. Now this took some nerve. Because just to speak to Pilate this way and say, look, we brought him. If he was innocent, we wouldn't have brought him to start with. He's guilty. Do something about it. And so Pilate wants some proof. Pilate wants to see what he's done. So the Pilate now, remember, he can't stand the Jews any more than the Jews can stand him. They don't like each other. The Romans put up with the Jews, and the Jews couldn't stand the Roman power. But the two here begin to work together because the Jews don't care a thing about if Jesus is alive or not. I mean, the Pilate doesn't care a thing about it because he doesn't have any impact on him. But for this Sanhedrin, it does because he's blown up this dirty system they've got going. The chief priest's idea of crime differed greatly from the Roman law. They were outraged by anything that threatened them and their interpretation of the Mosaic law. They lived by this law. It was gold into them. They could care less about following the Father and the Holy Spirit if it impacted their precious law. So the emotions were high, and so here the Romans, all they care about is we dominate it all. We don't care about you little Jews and your law, but we control everything. So verse 31, Pilate told him, you take him and judge him according to your law. He says, I don't want to have anything to do with it. This is too petty for me. Go ahead. I don't care about your law. I don't even care about this Passover. I'm just here to make sure you don't rise up. So they say, it's not legal for us to put anyone to death. I just find this whole statement ridiculous because it's the picture of hypocrisy. Like it would be a definition. We can't, it's not legal for us to put anyone to death, but put him to death. We found him guilty and he needs to be gone, but we're not going to be the ones to do it. So verse 32, they said this so that Jesus' words might be fulfilled, indicating what kind of death he was going to die. Not too long ago, he had told his disciples, I'm fixing to go before the chief priests and the elders and the scribes, and they're going to condemn me to death, and I'm going to die at the hands of the Romans. He predicted this whole thing. So crucifixion was the way the Romans handled death. The Persians started crucifixion, but the Romans perfected it. They had figured out a way to make it more torturous, more agonizing. They had perfected the system by which they hung a person on a cross, and so he knew this was the way he would die. Crucifixion was a uniquely Roman method. They would use it to put in front of the people in the public. They would line the streets with people that were dead on crosses. They used it as a scare tactic. It was a deterrent. You don't mess with the Romans. And so this method of execution would be slow. It wouldn't be quick like a sword. It would be excruciating. So this kind of shows of this. Jesus told them, look, these same people that are going to do this to me, they're going to be out for you. And today, we have to always remember that the people that run the system, the worldly system, that don't like God, they're going to be out for the people that do like God. They're going to be out for the people that want to worship God. So why are these Jewish leaders so eager to get rid of Jesus? Because of what he had exposed. He had exposed their sin, their corruption, this nasty tax, the currency exchange, the sacrificing animals. And what I thought was so neat as we were studying through the week was how I had never really paid attention to just one specific aspect, but throughout this whole story, Jesus slowly, methodically proves to everyone that's paying attention that he was in fact innocent. Now, what was the rule on Passover lambs? Before you sacrificed one, it had to be one particular thing, unblemished. It could not have one flaw. If it had a flaw, it had to be put away. And by Jesus doing this through these trials, he is completely proving, I'm innocent, I'm innocent, none of you can deny it, I'm innocent. And so he presents himself to people that read John's gospel, and I believe John's does as good as anybody could ever do at showing Jesus' innocence and why he had to be the innocent one, because he was that unblemished lamb for us. Okay, verse 33. Then Pilate went back into the headquarters, summoned Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" So he's looking something. He's like, well, okay, I'm going to see if he bites. And a trial of non-Romans by the Roman governor differed from the modern courtroom proceedings. Jesus didn't have a lawyer. He was not protected from unfair accusation. Pilate had this authority. He could kill him right then if he wanted to. He could say, "Matt, you're guilty. I just want to do it." But he didn't do that. Pilate didn't want any part of this nasty plot that they had going on. The chief priests and elders vehemently accused Jesus. He claimed to be Messiah. And there's one thing when we get to this scene where he's before Pilate. You notice it said Pilate went back into the headquarters. Where was everybody else? Outside. Why were they not in there with Pilate? Because they couldn't be in there with Pilate, because Pilate was a Gentile. Pilate would be unclean. If they go in that room where Pilate is, they can't eat the potluck dinner tomorrow for Passover. They can't be part of of the reunion they're going to have. So they say, "You take care of him." He comes out over and over, and you see this bounce back and forth with Pilate saying, "I can't find anything he's done wrong. Go back and ask him again." He said, and Caiaphas, look, the time's running out because the sun's fixing to rise, and he's got to get this done in a hurry. So Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" 33, Verse 34, now Jesus answered, "Are you asking this on your own?" And it's funny because it's like he says, did you come up with this all by yourself? Or did somebody tell you to ask? Look what he says. "Or have others told you about me? I'm not a Jew, am I?" Pilate says. "Your own nation and the chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?" So Pilate is stuck. He said, "Look, I'm not a Jew. You're not going to talk to me about God or what I need, or if you're a king of the Jews or anything else. I don't care about that. What have you done? They've given you over to me. This is your people, the Jews, and they've given you over to me to do something with you." And he asked him, "What have you done?" And this is where Jesus starts in on 36, and he starts, "My kingdom, my kingdom, my kingdom." Watch the words he says. "My kingdom is not of this world," said Jesus. "If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I wouldn't be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." So Pilate didn't want to hear this stuff. This is all just crazy stuff to him. All he cares about is, are you a threat to Rome? Because if you're not a threat to Rome, we're wasting time, and I'd rather be in the bed right now. They've drug him out in the middle of the night. So Pilate doesn't care about his kingdom. So 37, he asked him, "So you are a king then? And you say that I am a king?" That's what Jesus replied. He's playing word games with him. But look what he says here. "I was born for this, and I have come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And he spends about 30 seconds there witnessing to Pilate and saying, look, I'm the truth. That's why I'm here. I came here just for this day. I came here just for this moment to be before you. I came for just this opportunity to save the world and to testify to the truth. Okay, so remember when Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He exposes who God is by his life. Jesus kind of reveals the truth, reveals God in living the truth and speaking what the truth is. Look at what Pilate answers back. What is truth? And it's not like he said, well, what is truth? I really want to know. No, he's saying it in a way of like, yeah. I've had people come in here and tell me they knew the truth already. All these philosophers and Greek guys, they know everything. What's truth? And so he scoffs at him. All right? Make sure I ain't missing anything. So Jesus points out that the truth is in the revelation of God. By he's saying, my kingdom, he has separated himself from this world. And Pilate doesn't care about that. He doesn't care about it. If we're talking to somebody on the street and we start mentioning God, heaven, salvation, how many people you run into, and you can tell, like the minute that conversation starts, if you got an open spot or if it is shut the door on you, and that how they respond. That's what Pilate did here. Pilate said, I don't want to talk about that. We're not talking about me. We're talking about you. You're the one they sent to me. I'm not the one on trial. So Pilate here is more concerned about his power and his authority and keeping that in check. That was his mission, to make sure Rome holds the power when this is all through. So after he said this, he went out to the Jews again and says, I find no grounds for charging him. This is the second time he said, there's nothing this man's done. I find no grounds for charging him. Okay, before we run out of time, Luke 23, we're going to go back to a little bit of verses here. Luke 23, 1 through 4. We'll hit a few things. Then the whole assembly rose up, brought him to Pilate. I'm just reliving what we just talked about a little bit. They began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation, opposing payment of taxes to Caesar, and saying that he is the Messiah himself. They're making up stuff. So Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? He answered, you say so. Pilate then told the chief priests and the crowds, I find no grounds for charging this man. And Pilate saying, he's innocent. There's nothing he's done wrong. But they kept insisting. He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee where he started even there. Now that was words Pilate wanted to hear. The minute he said Galilee, that put him in another region, which means Pilate goes, ooh, Galilee? Wait a minute, he was there too? All right, good. That means that's not my jurisdiction. So he sends him to Herod Antipas. Herod he just happens to be there. And Pilate says, hot dog, this works out good. I don't have to deal with it. I'll send him to Herod because Herod is over Galilee. I'm not over that part. Sends him to Herod. Now, it's kind of neat that he goes into detail here about Herod, because this Herod was the son of the same Herod who asked for the wise men to bring back the news about baby Jesus. And 30-some years later now, his son says, okay, this is that Jesus, but he didn't take this seriously. Hadn't done the family tree, and he just brings him in, talks to him, and says, show me some magic. Show me some stuff you can do. Didn't show him anything, so Herod's like, this is silly. Sends him back to Pilate. So Jesus is getting moved from place to place like a ping pong ball. Okay. Matthew 27, 11 through 13. I know we're moving a lot. You don't have to do all this flipping. I'm reading. Matthew 27, 11 through 13. 27, 11 through 13. Now Jesus stood before the governor. Are you the king of the Jews? The governor asked him. You say so. While he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he didn't answer. Then Pilate said to him, don't you hear how much they are testifying against you? But he didn't answer him on even one charge, so that the governor was quite amazed. He didn't, because you didn't speak back. Nobody can convict this man. We can't get a conviction. Now the Jewish leaders, the Sanhedrin, they're good. They're good. They've already found him guilty because he claimed he was the living God, claimed he was the Son of God. But Pilate can't get anywhere, and he's stuck. And Caiaphas is going batty because the time is running out. Okay, back to Luke 23, 5 through 12. They kept insisting. He stirs it to people. We read this just a second. But Pilate heard this. He asked the man, was Galilean. Finding that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was in Jerusalem during those days. And Herod was glad to see Jesus. So we just talked about how Herod had his shot at him. All right, so after this happens, he goes back to Pilate. So while he's with Pilate this last time, Pilate has found him innocent twice. I can't find any reason to hold him guilty. There's nothing. But in John 19 and 12, John 19 and 12, from that moment, Pilate kept trying to release him. But the Jews shouted, if you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. That got his attention. Anyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. Now, there's one thing you did not do was cross Caesar, because Caesar was the most powerful Roman. And they pulled out their trump card, said, if you don't kill Jesus, we're going to report that you have made yourself a king and you're opposing Caesar. So they threaten him. They call his bluff. And it's not in this text, but it's in a different text. It's in Matthew 20, so we won't take time to read it for time's sake. But Pilate is sitting in his chair trying to decide what to do. And a messenger comes to him because Pilate's wife has had a dream in the middle of the night. A troubling dream that told her, don't have anything to do with this man named Jesus. And this message gets to Pilate, but when they pull out that trump card about Caesar, Pilate can't resist. And so he says, wait a minute, the Jews have this law that Passover we can release somebody. So he thinks of Barabbas, and I won't take time to study Barabbas, but Barabbas was a murderer. He was a revolutionary, and he had tried to disrupt everything, and he had killed a bunch of guys, and he was a murderer. He was guilty. He was completely deserving of death because of all the crime and the sin that he had committed, because of all the murders that he had been a part of, instigated, in fact. And so in verse 39, as I read there, you have a custom that I release one prisoner to you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? They shouted back, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a revolutionary, it says there. And so the other Gospels talk about Barabbas as well. And given the choice between Jesus, who has now been promoted and proven to be innocent, they knew he was innocent. They just wanted him gone. And Pilate knew he was innocent. Pilate tried for a while to get out of this. But whenever they held the Caesar thing over his head, he bowed to what they wanted. And he gave up Jesus. So the person I was listening to this week talk about this section, he said, so who was really on trial here? Was it Jesus, or was it the Sanhedrin and Pilate and Herod and everybody who was standing around that watched it happen, and all the nation that allowed this government to be in place, and the people who were Jews that allowed for the Jewish leaders to have this much power? All those people were on trial. Now, back to where we started at the beginning, after all of this, who condemned Jesus? Himself. They could not figure out a way to do it, so he did it anyway. He made sure that they found him guilty at just the right spot so that they would have to send him to the Romans. Look, the Jews would have stoned him, but they couldn't kill anybody because that would defile themselves before the Passover. They were also not allowed to kill. So he made sure they found a way to make sure he was killed by the Romans. He found a way to make sure that Pilate got his message at the right time from the Sanhedrin that if you don't do what we want, we're going to tell Caesar. All of this put into place. And I just thought about how much Satan was in on all this stuff. He had taken control of Judas, all the Sanhedrin, Annas, Caiaphas, the Roman, even Pilate, when given the opportunity, went that way instead. And when we get through it, all of it, we see the one thing that had to happen. Because when they came into Jerusalem, he came in through that sheep gate. And that's where all the sacrifice and lambs came through. And so the picture is here, I think when we get done, is that he made himself guilty on his own. Because he said, I'll lay my life down and I'll take it back up. And he made himself also, before all those people that were watching and listening, to understand completely, I'm innocent. I'm the unblemished lamb. I'm innocent as can be, but I'm going to die anyway. And he did it on his own. They could not figure out a way to do it. So he made it all happen by God's plan. So, anybody got questions or comments? Man, a bunch of details that I didn't get to, but we got the most of it. I hope we learned a lot too. All good? Ryan, will you pray?
God, thank you for this day and allowing us to come here to your place and worship you. I ask that you be with us throughout the week as we go into the week, and be with us at all times throughout this next message, and just give Pastor Tim the words to say.